Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we will be starting my Sharks yearly player reviews. We will start right at the top of the list. Last year in the 2021 season, it was Evander Kane. This year, no Evander Kane on the team, so there is a new face at the top, and that is, unsurprisingly, Timo Meier. And actually what makes this extremely interesting is that last season, my lowest ranked player on the San Jose Sharks with a grade of a D was actually Meier. He had a very disappointing 2021 season, and so he ended up going from 0 to hero for this particular season and stands right at the top as the Sharks maybe not far in a way, but definitely quite solidly their best player on the year. And the Timo Meier story doesn't just start at the beginning of this season, but I will go back to the 18-19 season. I've told this story multiple times before, but I will put more emphasis on it for this particular video. Obviously, in that 18-19 season, Timo Meier, he manages to score 66 points, a very, very solid season for himself, a 30-goal scorer that year, but that was also in a season where the San Jose Sharks were, elite. They were an exceptional team, one of the best teams offensively at the very least, and one of the best teams in general, honestly, in the entire league. Made it to the Western Conference Finals, could have potentially made it even further than that if not for a few unfortunate injuries. And so Meier, while he was a great player, he was still maybe the fourth to potentially even fifth best forward on that team, behind Pavelski, behind Couture, behind Hurdle, and potentially even behind the at the time trade deadline acquisition of Evander Kane. And so Meier, when you were looking for an offensive spark, you weren't really looking towards Timo Meier. But come next season, once Joe Pavelski ended up leaving in the offseason, he went to the Dallas Stars. Timo Meier was hoping to step into a slightly bigger role, and he didn't really live up to that potential. It wasn't a terrible year for Meier, as he still ended up leading the team in terms of points, but he didn't hit the 50-point mark. And it wasn't that Timo Meier stood out in some sort of extremely positive way while leading the team in points. It was more so that he was just the least bad of all of the bad seasons that the other players had, plus some injuries and things like that, which left Meier doing okay, but not nearly as great as you were hoping. That step forward ended up kind of being a step back. And then the following year as well, the 2021 season, was an even further step back as Timo Meier failed to hit the 20-goal mark for the first time in his entire career. It's a short career, but still, as he puts up 12 goals, which over a full 82-game season would have only given him 19 on the year, only 31 points also, and he suddenly went from hopefully being that top, 2 or 3 forward on the team to being like the 6th best forward on the team and being just a general very big disappointment, which is why he was last on my player review chart in my grading. But here this season he stepped up in a massive way. While last year many people pointed to his $6 million contract and said, the Sharks are overpaying Timo Meier, yet another bad San Jose Sharks contract. At the end of this year, it is once again suddenly looking like a massive steal for the San Jose Sharks, where if Meier had been making even $8 million, I probably wouldn't even bat an eye, because he was just that good this year. 77 games played, 35 goals for a new career high, 41 points and 76 points, just barely off of the point per game mark. Honestly, the Sharks kind of struggled over those last few games, and Meier also struggled over the last few games of this season, so he ended up losing the point per game mark, but still an extremely impressive season nonetheless. And we should also paint the picture that the fact that the Sharks, this was a year in which their offensive depth was even more horrible than potentially the previous year. Obviously, there were a few names changed around in the bottom 6, like bringing in Nick Bonino and Andrew Cogliano, but that didn't really do much to actually spark any sort of offense from the Sharks' bottom 6. And so when it comes to the Sharks' top 6, the major difference was Evander Kane was not on the team this season, which gave the Sharks one less dangerous forward up front. The vast majority of times, other teams could sort of game going into a Sharks game and sort of watch the video and say, hey, if we just staple our best defensemen and our best forwards onto the Timo Meier line, the Sharks probably aren't going to score any goals. And so that's exactly what pretty much every single team that had the opportunity did against the San Jose Sharks, and yet Meier still managed to perform exceptionally well. And another thing on top of that, this wasn't just sort of a very passive 76 points. It feels weird to kind of say that because, of course, if a player puts up 76 points, obviously they had a very good season. But sometimes players can get a point here or there while not necessarily having that great of a game. They could be dominated in their own zone constantly and then just have that one or two shifts where their skill wins out and they manage to get an assist there or a goal there or something of that nature. But that wasn't the case for Timo Meier. These weren't just, oh, hey, he got a random secondary assist in a 5-1 loss for the San Jose Sharks. No, more often than not, I would say in more than half of the games that Meier played, he was the best player on the San Jose Sharks, setting up plays constantly and just generally making his line better. And honestly, if I had to say, he was potentially the only player on this entire team who did that in any sort of consistent manner. There were still a couple of other players on the Sharks who had a pretty good season, and I'll obviously get to that in future videos, but nobody else even compares to Timo Meier in being a consistent force for the San Jose Sharks, which is why he is far and away the Sharks' best skater at the very least, and solidly their best player in general, which is a bit of a spoiler for who will likely be second on this list for the San Jose Sharks this season. When it comes to the plus-minus, obviously his -3 doesn't look super appealing, but it should be noted, of course, that plus-minus is also an extremely team-driven stat, and if your team is a playoff team, you're going to be getting up a lot of plus-minus, even if you're not necessarily doing all that well, and if you're on a bad team, your plus-minus is going to take a hit. To put this into perspective of the actual sort of consistent Sharks forwards, Timo Meier actually had the best plus-minus, or at least tied for the best plus-minus with this -3, so still rather impressive. And when it comes to his time on ice, he saw a massive boost to that, 19 minutes and 9 seconds, multiple minutes above where he was last season, which is no surprise. Bob Booner obviously saw with how Meier was playing this season that he could rely on him significantly more than he could in the previous year. The only player on the Sharks team, or the only forward on the Sharks team who actually had more time on ice per game than Timo Meier was Tomas Hertl, and it should be noted this is general time on ice. Tomas Hertl plays a good amount of shorthanded time, so Timo Meier right up there, even though he doesn't really play all that much, if at all, shorthanded. So clearly Meier was relied on significantly, and he delivered when called upon. And so when it comes to his grade, and this is going to be a very interesting grade because it's actually the first time that I will be giving a player an A+ grade. For instance, last season when I talked about Evander Kane, I sang his praises, but in the end I only ended up giving him the grade of an A. But Timo Meier, I thought, did so fantastically for this season, especially considering the circumstances for the San Jose Sharks, that it was hard to give him anything less than an A+. It should be noted, of course, that some people will view an A+ as a perfect grade, as if Timo Meier did literally nothing wrong this season, a 100%. But then at that point, if you're evaluating a player, it's hard to really ever give an A+ at that point because nobody can actually sustain a perfect season over a full 82-game year. The fact is, if there was so much upside that it outweighed some very little downside, like there was with Timo Meier's game, I felt as though an A+ was deserving, and as such, he got that. Class dismissed.